Hi, I'm Amy McGraw with the Garden Astronomer, telling true stories of incredible astronomical events that you may not have heard of but will never forget. Today, we're going to meet a young Australian farmer who, armed with little more than a small telescope and his own determination, discovers one of the most spectacular comets of the 19th century. And we'll see it through the eyes of the people who witnessed it. A sailor escaping a wartime blockade, a woman watching from her home in Louisiana, and soldiers on opposite sides of the American Civil War. This is the story of the Great Comet of 1861. Thanks for listening in. It's May 13th, 1861. We're in Windsor, New South Wales, Australia, 60 miles northwest of Sydney, where the Hawkesbury River cuts a slow, broad path through the land. Beneath the surface, fish ripple through the water. Along the banks, riverbirds tuck their heads in for the night. This is rich, fertile land, wheat, maize, and sheep country as far as the eye can see. But the Hawkesbury has a long memory for mischief. It floods without warning, swallowing roads and dissolving fences. To survive here, the people of Windsor learn to build on the higher ground. On one of these modest rises stands Peninsula House. And outside in the dark, a 27-year-old farmer named John Tebbutt is awake. He isn't watching the river, though. He's watching the sky. Tebbutt's tools are simple. He has a sextant and a tiny brass marine telescope gifted by his father. No computer-driven mount, no assistance. Just a lone farmer standing in the autumn air with brass and glass, measuring a sky that has no bottom. He points his telescope toward the constellation Eyewitnesses and sweeps through the stars. Then he stops. A fuzzy smudge catches his eye. He checks his copy of Nicolas Louis de Lacai's catalog of southern stars and nebulae. There's no nebula listed here, nothing at all. He doesn't know it yet, but this young sheep farmer has just spotted an approaching comet, and its light will soon cast shadows on European observatories, captivate soldiers on American battlefields, and make a world currently tearing itself apart in war stop, just for a moment, to look up. Over the following nights, haze and cloud conspire against him. He steals what glimpses he can, but the object refuses to give itself away. Then, on the night of May 22nd, the sky's clear. He looks again. The smudge has moved half a degree across the sky, a distance equal to the full width of the moon. Tebbutt announces his discovery in a letter to the Sydney Morning Herald. It's published on May 25th, 1861, the morning of his 27th birthday. A letter titled, "A Comet Visible," begins humbly. "Sir, will you kindly allow me through the columns of your valuable paper to apprise your astronomical readers of the presence of a comet? While engaged in examining the heavens on Monday the 13th, a nebulous star of about the 5th magnitude in the constellation of Eyewitnesses attracted my attention. At the same time, the Reverend William Scott, the government astronomer at Sydney Observatory, receives a note from Tebbutt about his findings. Scott confirms the comet on the nights of May 27th and 30th, remarking the object is just visible after sunset to the naked eye. By early June, the comet closes in. On June 8th, Tebbutt describes it as a beautiful object, its tail having assumed considerable dimensions and being plainly visible to the naked eye. Tebbutt computes the orbital elements using his self-taught mathematics, and he notices something in the numbers. The Earth will pass through the outer edge of the comet's tail on or around June 29th. He sends off his prediction to the Sydney Morning Herald. The paper prints the letter in the June 15th edition. He includes details and figures about the comet's approximate orbit and approach that most everyday readers wouldn't understand. But he closes it with words that do capture the attention of the public. My calculations show that the comet will soon move rapidly toward the north, and that on the 29th, the Earth will be at no great distance from the extremity of the tail. There is some probability of the comet becoming visible in the full daylight about that date. Tebbutt's prediction proves remarkably accurate. On June 29th, the comet passes within roughly 20 million kilometers, or 12.4 million miles of Earth. As it does, the Earth grazes the comet's outer tenuous tail, and the sky changes. J.R. Hind, a respected London astronomer, writes to the Times, "A singular yellow phosphorescent glare, very like diffused aurora borealis, yet being daylight, such aurora would scarcely be noticeable. The sun, though shining, gave but feeble light." And in Athens, Greece, the German astronomer J.F. Julius Schmidt watches it cast faint shadows on the observatory's walls. Let that sink in for a moment. Author Kaushik Patari speculates that the first person in England to see the comet itself may have been William C. Berder of Clifton, Bristol. Berder writes to the editor of the Times in London on Sunday, June 30th. "Sir, at 2:40 a.m. today, I detected a brilliant comet near the northwest horizon. It was visible till 3:20 a.m. It appeared as bright as Capella, surrounded by a nebulous haze. But I saw no tail. The daylight put out both the comet and Capella nearly at the same time. Your readers will therefore consider this as a proof that it is a brilliant object." Across the Atlantic Ocean on that same Sunday evening of the 30th, the CSS Sumter is running for open water. The American Civil War has only begun months earlier, and the comet will soon be known as the War Comet. Confederate Navy officer Raphael Sims has been bottled up in New Orleans for weeks. The Union Navy blockading the mouth of the Mississippi to keep Confederate ships from reaching the sea. Then his chance comes. The Sumter runs hard down the river and breaks through the blockade into the Gulf of Mexico. A nation is already tearing itself apart behind her. The USS Brooklyn is closing fast, though she will never catch her. Taking respite in the calm of the evening, Sims watches the skies from the deck. The sun had gone down behind a screen of purple and gold, and to add to the beauty of the scene, as night set in, a blazing comet, whose tail spanned nearly a quarter of the heavens, mirrored itself within 100 feet of our little bark, as she plowed her noiseless way through the waters. A day later, a diarist named Kate Stone writes about its appearance from her home in Louisiana. "There's a comet visible tonight. We were surprised to see it, as we did not know it was expected. Have seen nothing of it in the papers. It's not very bright, but has the appearance of a large star, Venus at her brightest, with a long train of light seen dimly as through a mist." At this point, the comet's head is shining around magnitude -2. To put that into perspective, the magnitude scale is flipped. So a negative number means an object is pretty bright. A -2 puts this comet in the same class as Venus or Jupiter, to give you an idea of how it's outshining the other stars in the sky. And that tail spreads at least 70 degrees on July 1st. If you want to visualize just how huge that is, try this. Hold your arms straight out toward the horizon, make a fist, and then stack 7 fists upward. That is how much of the sky a 70-degree comet tail would swallow up. It is exactly this dominating presence that greets James Robinson, Anchored on a schooner in the Mexican harbor, Robinson wakes in the early hours of the morning to find the sky entirely transformed. He captures the breathtaking sight. I woke in the night at 1 o'clock when I had a glorious sight of the largest comet I ever beheld. The head or nucleus was as large as Venus and very bright and blazing, and about 20 degrees above the horizon, pointed to the north, while the bright long tail reached full halfway across the heavens. It was a most wonderful sight. But while Robinson watches from the peaceful waters of Mexico, thousands of miles away in Virginia, that same sky is being watched by men at war. Private Charles F. Johnson of the 9th New York Volunteer Infantry is journaling in his U.S. Civil War experiences. On the night of July 18th, he sits outside his tent with cannon fire in the distance, looking up at the very same light. The young man is insightful, almost poetic, in his writing. Last night was a most beautiful night. The moon shone so brightly as to almost blot out the stars. A gentle breeze from the James fanned one's features with just enough motion to produce a feeling akin to inspiration. And I made my bed outside as the thought of a crowded tent on a night like this seemed unbearable. And there I lay dreaming daydreams far into the night. I watched the comet, wondering if that mysterious little visitor was not perhaps at the same time watched by eyes that would beam gladly into mine, and I composed quite a number of beginnings of addresses to the curious thing, whatever it may be. But the comet is now tired of his visit to these regions of space, or disgusted, it may be, with the appearance of things on this side of our planet, for he is now leaving in seemingly greater haste than he came, with his tail between his legs, for the unknown regions out yonder. Well, goodbye, and fare thee well, stranger. And I fervently hope that thou mayst see the face of the earth beaming with smiles, where now her frowns are lowering on thy next visit, if that should be while this little world is still in existence. And to sleep at last, to dream again not more strangely than if awake, and only disturbed by a little cannonading up the river. Through those brilliant summer weeks, the comet carves a memorable path across the northern sky. It arrives in late June in the constellation Auriga, near the bright star Capella, its enormous fan-shaped tail already reaching towards Polaris, the North Star. Through early July, it sweeps northward and into Ursa Major, its tail grazing the familiar stars of the Great Bear before pushing deep into Draco, the dragon that winds around the northern pole. By August, it can no longer be seen with the naked eye. Those with telescopes continue to follow its retreat into the outer solar system through May of 1862. What strikes me all these years later is not the science and the awe of it, remarkable as that is. It's in the middle of a war, in the middle of grief, in the middle of ordinary life. The world stops for a moment. So many people look up, and for one fleeting moment in history, they're on the same side of something, standing together beneath a sky that belongs to no one and everyone all at once. John Tebbutt would spend his time tracking the comet through his marine telescope. When he finally lost sight of it in early September 1861, he wrote in his diary that he thought he would not be able to find it anymore. As with his earlier predictions, he was correct about this too. But his comet discovery launched him. 3 years later, he built a small observatory on his property and equipped it with proper instruments. Over the following 4 decades, he published meticulous observations of comets, variable stars, minor planets, eclipses, and transits. And in 1881, he even discovered another comet. When he died in 1916, his face was not yet on any banknote. That honor came later in 1984 when the Australian $100 note was redesigned to feature Tebbutt's portrait alongside an engraving of his observatory at Windsor. A sheep farmer and amateur astronomer was now on the country's largest denomination until 1996. Today, the Hawkesbury River still slips its banks. The stars still turn above Peninsula House. The Great Comet of 1861 is still out there, making its long journey. Current calculations suggest it could return to our skies around the year 2267. But the sky it crossed then? That is the same exact sky we stand beneath tonight, unchanged, waiting. All we have to do is look up and wait for the next great comet to arrive. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want to spend more nights under the stars uncovering the forgotten human stories in astronomy, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Amy McGraw with the Garden Astronomer. Until next time, keep your feet on the grass, your mind in the stars, and don't forget to look up.